The ride of your life is daddyhood.
For those of you who cannot wait and love daddyhood, please head over to our Patreon. We have exclusive access to episodes, we have early access to episodes, and we have behind the scenes footage. Head on over there, sign up, be part of the exclusive daddyhood group, and join us over there. All right, welcome back to Daddyhood. We are on our path to parenthood. I'm so excited for today's episode. Mark Daley, thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Before we get started, I have to practice my dad jokes. So bear with me.
Fantastic.
Here we go. I have a lot to learn, and I'm learning my jokes. Mark, what country's capital is growing the fastest?
I don't know.
Ireland. Every day it's Dublin.
Well done.
Well done. That was a good one.
Yeah.
I like that. All right. So obviously you have a new book, and I'm going to make sure it's linked out. We'll talk all about that. But before that, I just want to give you guys some background on Mark. Mark is a social activist, entrepreneur, foster turned adoptive father. He has over 2 decades of experience in message development, communication strategy, and public policy, including as a communications director and spokesperson for Senator Hillary Clinton and on her 2008 presidential campaign. I think that might be how you know my husband as well.
Absolutely.
He has worked with more than 30 members of Congress, numerous governors, and other elected officials. He is the founder of One Iowa, the state's largest LGBTQ plus equality organization, the fosterparent.com, a national platform to connect interested families with foster organizations. Daley lives in Southern California with his husband and 3 children. That's a little bit about you. We partner with the Family Equality, if you know anything about that organization.
I am a huge fan of them.
They're the best. And so I saw, like, obviously One Iowa and a lot of the new legislation going in with Don't Say Gay, now hitting Iowa. There's a lot that we can get into. I don't know if we want to get into that right off of the bat.
Absolutely.
But I'm excited to have you on. I'm excited to talk about your book. But, I mean, your book is based on true events and storytelling. And let's start your path to parenthood.
Absolutely. So, my husband and I got married in 2015, right after it became legal. And we wanted to start a family, much like you guys.
Yeah.
And so we were kind of exploring our options. We really didn't feel like private adoption was right for us. We had some friends that had waited for a long time, and we're like, we don't want to wait. We're impatient. We wanted to just get moving. Surrogacy was our route. We were going down surrogacy. And, I had done some work with foster care nonprofits, and I actually have 3 cousins who entered my family through foster care. I grew up in an area where we had kids who were in foster care in our classes in school growing up. And so I was familiar to some extent with the system. And, just as happenstance had it, we had gone to this wedding. We went and had breakfast the morning of the wedding with a young woman who had aged out of foster care, who I had known through some of my nonprofit work.
Yep.
And in conversation, she said 2 things that really stood out to me. First, she said, I wasn't raised by my mother. And while I had these wonderful maternal figures, I always felt sort of like I came second because they always had biological children of their own. And my husband and I had been talking about fostering after surrogacy. And so as soon as we got to the car, he turned to me immediately and he's like, what if we foster and then did surrogacy? I was like, I agree. I mean, I think maybe that's the route we should go, because I wouldn't want a child to feel that way. I don't know. I mean, it was just sort of this emotional moment. And then the other, of course, side was that, any child raised by 2 men is not going to be raised by their mother in that sense too, right? So obviously it just, the whole thing connected with me and on so many levels. And so we got back home to LA, we called the agencies and they came out, and that's what really started our journey. And we thought we could go into this with this idea that we could get a baby, we've heard these stories of moms that leave the maternity ward, go outside to smoke a cigarette and don't come back. And we thought maybe we would be those parents that would get that baby, like we could sort of ask the right questions when they called. And we thought that maybe we'd have a leg up and asking the right questions to get that slam dunk case. And in exchange, what happened for us is they came to our house and said, hey, you guys have a big house. Would you take siblings? And I thought they meant like, hey, if mom has a kid 3 years down the road, could we call? Right. We're like, yeah, sure. We always wanted more kids. That'd be great. Well, they were waiting because they knew that there would be families that had sibling sets that would come in. And that's ultimately what happened to us. Is we got a call 4 hours later, we had a 3-month-old and a 13-month-old biological brothers at our front door. And that's, where our story begins.
Wow. So you have a 3-month-old and a 13-month-old. How do those two get into foster care together or around the same time? Is it that the mother just all of a sudden was like, this is too much and gives them up, or how does that begin on the back end? Do you know?
Yeah, in our case, and I tell the story. Obviously, I've changed all the names and all that stuff for legal reasons, and obviously for compassionate reasons. But this was a family that had a lot of trouble growing up. I mean, the mom and the dad both had struggled with mental health issues, addiction issues, so many different things. But when the younger child was born, I call him Logan in the book. When he was born, they were in the hospital. The social workers noticed some erratic behavior from the mom, and it launched an investigation. So the baby did go home with the parents for a little bit of time, but then when social workers would come to visit, there were some red flags in the house, and that's really what prompted the investigation. And so when they were detained, they went to go live with the paternal grandmother, who had them for a very short period of time before she turned them over to the county, just due to she had some medical issues and other things going on in her life. And that's when they called us.
Yeah. So I don't want to get too much into spoiling the book, just because I'm somewhat familiar with the story. I'm very, very excited. The book, by the way, the title is Safe, a memoir of fatherhood, foster care, and the risks we take for family. There's so much to get into. Once again, don't want to spoil too much, but so all of a sudden you're successful in the foster care system, which, by the way, those familiar with the podcast knows that we've had episodes where we've touched on this, and one of the big initiatives I know that we have in LA County with the new mayor, and also the work with family equality, is talking a lot about aging out of foster care. Yeah. However, what I'm interested in with discussing with you is obviously success stories, learning experiences. I don't want to call them failures, learning experiences along the way, and just the complications that go into it, because it is not an easy. Jordan and I briefly looked. We knew pretty early on. Pretty early on that we wanted to navigate through surrogacy first. Yeah. We have spoken about adoption later, but I think focusing this topic around foster care is so interesting. So let's go back. You have the two that come in. Yeah. So now what?
So we have 2 kids that show up at our door. I mean, and it's funny, when you're having a baby through surrogacy or biologically, right? Which you have this luxury of what you're going to get, and relatively when you're going to get it, right? I mean, so you can plan for onesies and swaddles and bottles and formula and whatever you need to have in the house. But when you're doing it through foster care, you have no idea what you're going to get. I mean, we had requested a baby, but the age range was really 0 to 3. So we had no idea where that was going to fall. And then how big would they be? And so when they arrived, the younger child was actually a little malnourished, and so he was very small. And the older child was 36 pounds at 13 months, so just a much larger kid. And so that night, it looked like Toys R Us or Babies R Us had just thrown up all over our kitchen. I mean, there were bottles everywhere. There was a high chair that wasn't there in the morning, and it was just covered in food. I mean, it was just, it was comedy of what, I didn't know what a diaper genie was the day before, and now I'm figuring out where am I going to keep this in my house.
Right.
There's so much of that goes into it. And I share a lot of that in the story because it's funny and it's life. I think one of the big things to note with foster care is, we talk about success, we adopted, but the truth is this was one of the harder things for me to accept, and still is to this day, is that the idea that for my family to come together and to stay together meant that another family had to break apart. And that's just a really hard thing for anyone to accept, right? Children don't volunteer for foster care. Right. Nobody signs up to leave their biological family, regardless of the circumstances at home. And, we didn't ever enter into this thinking we want to take somebody else's kid. It was, we want to be in a place where there's a child who needs a family to love and care for them. And we knew we had the ability to love and care,
Was there any guilt during this process for you?
I mean,
you can say that, and then when you start thinking about it, it becomes very real. And I'm sure you had to make inquiries about health records and get into the biological fathers, just because I know I've had to do that through our egg, and even with our surrogate, we want to know background and living conditions and what they were exposed to and not exposed to.
Of course. I mean, look, I'm not a person who deals with like the gray of life.
Yeah.
You know, my husband is 20 plus years sober. And so he, like, one day at a time, he is totally fine with it.
Yeah.
He teaches meditation. Like, I am the complete opposite. I was having anxiety attacks, panic attacks during this process. And, you know, it's to your point, you want to know what happened because you want to be able to mitigate risk down the road. It's not that, you know, it's not that I'm not going to love this child anymore if I find out that their parent has some sort of, you know, mental health issue. It's that I want to make sure that I'm prepared to handle that should this child have something like that come up. And so there comes these things, but also, you know, as the parents throughout the book, it's really this roller coaster of, are they staying? Are they going? You know, are they going to reunify with their birth parents, or are they going to stay with us? And that really comes to life through my anxiety in the book. Yeah. But it's finding out, you know, the parents start to make progress and you start to see them a lot differently than when you first met them. You know, me, myself, you know, and that was the way I felt, like, oh, you know, they're starting to do things. But then there's this fear of like, well, if they do go home, will they be safe? It's not about, will they have all that we can offer? Because that's not fair, right? You know, I mean, I come from a place of privilege that they have never experienced. That being said, you know, they have to be able to keep their children safe. And that's what was most important to me.
So, I mean, when you all of a sudden get the phone call, email, text, whatever it might be, of saying like, hey, here's your 2 children that we're placing with you, is there any legal protection that grants you custody rights, father, you know, like to the children, or is there still a waiting time where the parents could come back into the picture?
So immediately when a child enters foster care, the goal of foster care is always reunification. So they always want to reunify a child with their birth parents. Okay. And I fully support that. That's the way it should be. Truthfully, like just because a parent is struggling with some issue doesn't mean that they're unfit to care for their parent. We have to do better as a society to give them supports to either heal or prevent them from developing that in the first place. So like part of the reason I wrote this book was this whole idea that I feel like we as a society owe it to all of these children and the people living in the community around us to do a better job and provide more upstream interventions to prevent things like, you know, you were talking about kids who age out. 40% of the people homeless on LA streets were in the foster care system.
Yeah.
You know, it becomes when children are failed by all the systems and all the adults in their lives, foster care is the backstop. Right. It's where they end up.
Yep.
You know,
I mean, that can be a whole episode in itself of just the aging out portion of foster care. Yeah. I know, but so talk to me a little bit about the anxiety that goes into this, because I advocate for a lot of mental health. I myself had anxiety and depression that I navigated and worked through in my coming out experience. What did you do not only for yourself, but also for these children to like set up, evaluate, support your mental and emotional health and theirs? Because I can imagine, you know, even though they're so young, there's still a change and there's still like this moment where you're like, I have to take care of them.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. It is, I mean, children, everyone says children are resilient. It's like you don't really experience that until you actually have one in your house that you're responsible for everything they do, you know. Yeah. And we had some funny times, like, you know, where over the course of the time that they were with us, my husband got really involved with, and because he teaches meditation, like the older one in particular would have these tantrums and he would have these little meltdowns. And so Jason taught him how to breathe. And so Ethan is what I call him in the book, would start to get angry and he'd like throw himself down on the ground and just start like huffing and puffing, like you know, he's trying to blow the house down, right? I mean, it's just hysterical to watch. But what he was really, what struck me was that Jason had taught him how to recognize the emotion and sort of give life to like, okay, I'm okay to feel this, and now let me try to work through it. Which, you know, I was 40 years old at the time, I couldn't do. Yeah. You know, so I mean, Jason is a wonder dad. I'm still learning on that. You know,
you said you practice this meditation. So Jordan is the one who meditates in our relationship. My mental health journey is going to play video games because I can't shut my brain off. Yeah. So like if I was going to try to meditate for 10, 15 minutes, I spiral either up or down. I'm thinking of work things. I just cannot shut my brain off. The only way I do it is by distraction and so video games is my meditation.
I try.
Sounds familiar.
I do. Yeah. You and I are a lot more aligned on that.
Yeah. So you can only do your best. So obviously having someone like Jason in your life helped with that mental health journey then?
Absolutely. You know, I mean, it's even like when we were talking about having kids, it's like, you know, where I grew up in a very working class suburb of Boston, right? I didn't know any gay people growing up.
Yeah.
To me, you know, being gay was a punchline, unfortunately, right? I mean, that's, and I grew up with that, like, I don't want to be a punchline.
Yeah.
And so naturally there's so much shame and all these other things that
Yep.
Brene Brown talks about to us, you know,
Yep.
that we all naturally feel. And so I think as, you know, then when I met Jason and I fell in love with him and I saw the way that he interacts with his nieces and nephews and my nieces and nephews and any kid around us, it was like, God, this guy needs to be a dad. You know, it was like, and that wasn't in the cards for me. I just never thought I would be able to do that. You know, and then of course, at a certain point, we're in love and then legally allowed to get married. It kind of changed everything for us.
Yeah. I mean, that was so, and I talked about this with my doctor actually. The biggest thing that kept me in the closet for the longest time was I had a vision of being a father and I wanted to be a dad. And that unfortunately meant I couldn't come out in my mind.
Right. Of course.
It just wasn't a real possibility for me. And obviously now it's something that's beautiful and I'm
so glad
grateful.
it is a possibility. For
I know,
you.
right?
Yeah.
So, I know you don't want to spoil the book too much,
Yeah.
but if you had like a quick Spark Notes version to talk through with people,
Yeah.
without spoiling, can you give me sort of the arc?
Yeah, I mean, really, what it is, you know, follows our journey to becoming dads, right? I mean, it's a look at like two gay guys in Los Angeles who are sort of, you know, living their best lives, and then all of a sudden they fall in love, they decide to have kids, they start this journey, and their eyes are just so open to really the struggles that other families face, and it's, you know, from poverty being the biggest indicator, you know. The way that we police poverty in communities around this country and over surveil them. Race is obviously another big issue. You know, where children of color tend to be disproportionately enrolled in foster care.
Yep.
There's, you know, there's just so many things that we didn't have, and you know, and even as someone who has this background in politics and has these, you know, connections in high places and that stuff, there was nothing I could do to change the outcome.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that is something that, to me, really stood out. And I talk about this in the book, is like, you know, I do have these connections and I do have people to call and so on and so forth, but I can't imagine what it's like for the folks who don't have that.
Right.
Or I could imagine, I guess, in that sense, because this was the first time I felt so helpless.
Right.
You know, and I will give the spoiler of this here, but so, you know, skip ahead a few seconds here if you don't want to hear. But, you know, the boys end up reunifying. We, of course, deal with our grief over, you know, losing them. We wait a significant amount of time and then find out that there's 3 other children who are all siblings who are going to be available for adoption if we were interested. And we decide to do that. And at the point, we had already started surrogacy again, you know, for the second go around. And then we decided to table surrogacy. And then we took in 3 kids and fell in love and married and adopted them. And then about 10 months later, we got a call that the boys were back in care with a younger sister. And would we take the 3 of them, which would have given us 6 children, which put us in sort of the same situation in many ways that we saw their grandmother in when she had to say no. You know, it's like, as much as you love these children and you want what's best for them, the best thing we could do was not parent them, which is so hard.
Yeah.
You know,
How much time went by during that time?
it was about 14 months.
So you had the 2 in your house for 14 months before they reunified?
Sorry, we had them for about 16 months or so, and then it was about 14 months between the time that we had them and then we took in, you know, my children, Amy, Eddie, and Joshua, who we adopted.
And you took them in how quickly after so I guess where I'm going with this is, how long did it take for you to sort of go through that grieving process before you hopped right back on of like,
oh,
we
that
have
was
to build a
14
family?
months.
14 months.
Yeah.
Got
We wanted to, it was like one of those, we weren't sure what we were going to do. And we kind of expected the boys would be back in. We knew it, you know, it was like in our hearts, we're like, there's no way. And it really, what happened was, it wasn't that they reunified because the judge that was handling their case said that they should go home. In fact, quite the opposite. The judge had said that, you know, take another 6 months and see, you know, and stay in foster care. And what had happened was, when the boys were initially detained, their mother had appealed the case, saying they never should have been detained in the first place. And so 3 judges on the California Appeals Court ruled they never should have been detained. And so they were sent home through a loophole, which actually means if they were to enter back in, which they eventually did, it was as if they were never in the first place. So it would reset the clock to.
So they went back to the birth mom.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the birth mom said, never mind, I shouldn't have done this. Or
No. She, you know, I think she's had a really difficult life, you know, and, you know, she doesn't have a ton of supports around her, but there was eventually an abuse situation and the boys were detained again because of abuse with their sister.
I'm sure that's not easy to say and talk about. And I think that that's like one thing with daddyhood and like what we stand about is like humanizing situations. So like, I love the fact that like you just said that so gracefully, because a lot of people in your position would have different words to say and go about this. And I think a little resentment, spite can come along with that just because of like how it impacted your family. So I think it's beautiful that you have that approach now, because it like that is the goal with this, is like humanizing these really difficult situations that people go through to build their family.
I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I think and in the book, I really try to go out of my way to be compassionate towards the family, because again, it's like, you know, the stuff that the biological parents have gone through in their life, which, you know, I talk abuse, you know, addiction, mental health issues. I cannot even relate to any of it or fathom. I mean, the mom lost her mother at a young age. She was raised by a single, you know, grandmother in an environment where she wasn't safe. So, I mean, here's a woman who was victimized and perpetrated against, that then never had anyone modeling parenting to her, you know, in a healthy way. And then she has these children, and, you know, it's like, I wanted her to be successful, but I also knew that if her success meant that I was going to lose the kids, but I would never have taken her children if I thought she was going to be safe, you know. But when they went back, I knew in my heart she wasn't ready. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to spoil more for people. So in the show notes here, we'll have a link for you guys to buy Safe. I can't wait to get into this more, but I want to pivot for a second and talk about the fosterparent.com.
Yeah.
So what went into creating that? What inspiration and also just like creating that platform and what you're doing in connecting families?
Thanks. So what happened was when the boys moved in, I had an agency that I was running at the time, and I was like traveling a lot to New York and other places, and I realized I wanted to be home. And the company was doing really well. So I decided to, you know, divest my interest in the company and sell it. And I started to just sort of consult. And one of the agencies that I worked with quickly was a nonprofit in the foster care space, and realized that they were doing foster parent recruitment like through old school ways, you know, like tabling at events and stuff like that. I'm like, you could reach so many more people using online media and stuff that I've done professionally now. So I started doing this sort of as a side thing, and then it became something that worked. We were recruiting foster families, and LA County reached out and said, hey, would you be interested in helping us? And so I worked with LA County's really the Department of Probation, and then which had never had a foster parent who wasn't someone who was related or knew the child prior to them entering their care, before I started working with them. And now they have several. And then now I work with California Department of Social Services doing the statewide recruitment work using online media. But I've spawned this off into the fosterparent.com, which is a site that allows me to do what I do in California nationally. I can just run ads for any nonprofit or state government agency to help recruit foster parents, you know, but flipping a switch basically.
Incredible. So is there any loopholes specifically that you're looking to help in California? And then also same question for nationwide.
Any loopholes?
Or is there, what's like the main initiatives, I guess, just right now that you're trying to tackle? Because I know that's like a loaded question, because I'm sure there's many.
Yeah.
But what's like the top priorities right now?
You know, I think that there's so kids in foster care, you know, my husband and I went in wanting a baby, right? That's what a lot of people do.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So the truth is there's a lot of kids that are older, you know, that need homes. So we're looking for kids that are, you know, 9+ and that teenagers. We're looking for people who are just looking to foster, like that idea of just helping families reunify, the parents get their feet back together, you know, get the situations back together. And then really, you know, there's a disproportionate number of LGBTQ plus youth in care. I mean, an estimated 30% of kids in foster care identify in some way as LGBT. So that's we need homes that are affirming to help these youth, you know, as you and I both know very intimately, you know, navigate their journey. You know? And then there's some for medically fragile and other, kids that have different issues, special needs.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I found along our journey that I thought just was interesting, and I'm curious if you had the same challenges or conversations. I mean, there's obviously an amount through surrogacy and through how the route we went. There's a ton of questions people have, whether they don't know the egg donor is different from the surrogate and all of these things. One thing that I found interesting that, I don't know, it might just be an LGBTQ plus thing where people are just like, they sort of question your qualifications. And I mean that I've faced even people being like, are you sure it's the right time? Like, you have your career, it's earning. Like, are you sure? Like, it's very old school. Like, which one of you is going to quit your job to raise your kid? And it's like, it's somewhat offensive because I'm just like, this is the most, and where I'm going with this is planning your family and having what we're calling the path to parenthood is one of the most intentional things a gay man or woman or even anyone can do. The amount of documentation, the amount of money that we have spent to now build our family is like, we're not signing up to get a car, go on a vacation. Like, we are planning our family. And so for someone to sort of like be pretty lazy and say, are you sure it's the right time? I'm sure there was probably people along your journey with the foster care system that somewhat did that. It's so interesting to me when people sort of like say that.
Well, we were probably older than you too, so that made it a little easier for us to get the less people saying, "You're sure it's the right time." They're probably like, "Well, better now than never." But I think you were saying this, like, there's no such thing as an unplanned pregnancy in our world, right? Like, we never had to worry about a pregnancy scare or morning sickness or any of the things that go along with this. It is a very deliberate, very calculated decision that we have thought long and hard about. And so when we walked into the agencies in LA, in fact, actually, we worked for a nonprofit that sent agencies to us. So we had like people coming to our house trying to recruit us. And they were like sitting on the couch bringing us gifts. Like, they wanted us.
Out here in California?
In LA, yeah.
Okay.
But I think that was in part because, they knew we were there to be there,
Yep.
That being said, there are, I think it's like 14 or so states that don't, and Family Equality is working to change this, but do not have laws on the books that protect LGBT families when it comes to fostering.
I think we dropped it down to 13. So it's 13 now can openly discriminate against same-sex couples. Maybe 14?
But I have no idea.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
I had James Black, who's formerly Stacey Stevenson, on.
Yeah.
And she's the CEO of Family Equality. And we had a great conversation about all of this. So very familiar with the work that they do.
Yeah, James is amazing.
Yeah. So let's get into like just your perspective of like the systematic issues. I know obviously you have a background in politics and running campaigns, and I'm doing some work right now on a bill in DC for mental health.
Great. And
I know there's a lot that goes into this. So from your perspective, what are some steps that our government can take to help in the foster care system?
That's so and this is really why I wrote this book, right? Is I think that it's incumbent on government, of course, but I also think it's incumbent upon just regular, ordinary people, right? I mean, I know your husband, so I know you are in a lot of rooms where elected officials or people who are running for office are.
Yep.
And the things that I want to hear in those rooms are like, hey, Senator, what are you doing on foster care? Because if they understand that people care about these issues, they're more inclined to do something. And the reason we haven't had tremendous progress on this is because they don't hear. There's no lobby on behalf of foster kids.
Right.
Certainly they're not AARP or, they're just, they can't vote. Many of them can't even speak. Right. Yeah. So there's that element to it. I just want them to know that there's people out here who care. I think there are so many different things that we can do to reform, but most of them are upstream interventions, like ways to combat poverty, deal with addiction. I mean, fentanyl right now, 110,000 people overdosed deaths last year from fentanyl. That's up 50% in drug overdoses in 8 years. Where fentanyl is so dangerous that if a baby touches it, it will kill the baby. Like, that's how, and it's happening in communities across the country. Wow. It is horrific,
I mean, one, I couldn't even imagine. And I think that's the other thing that I don't think a lot of people think of when you hear foster care in the system. Mm-hmm. There's an umbrella of why they're in foster care. Right. It's not just a one size fits all category. It's the whole arrangement of different things. And I think that's sometimes hard for people to understand and sort of get a feel for.
I think there are just a whole bunch of streams that run right into that river, right? I mean, you've got from mass incarceration to pay gap to poverty, to, drug addiction, abuse, mental health obviously is a big one.
Yeah. So was there anything when you were going through this process, and I say this from obviously a privileged position of going through the surrogacy of like knowing when we were choosing our egg donor, we didn't want X, Y, and Z. Like I had what was more of like an acute stress response with my depression that was not like clinical depression as far as long term. Like I'm off my medications now after I came out. I've had the right support and I feel healthy. But I know I was subject to that, so I didn't want that in my egg donor.
Right.
And I know that's obviously like one of the benefits of going through surrogacies. You can pick and choose. Was there anything you and your husband were like, I don't know, or we're just like, we need a family. We want to support these kids. And this is...
we had a whole checklist of things of questions we were asking, but I will say, they do sit you down and there's a conversation about, would you be able to deal with a child who has, autism or, something like all these different things. And so we kind of like went through the list of that, and we really didn't have very many exclusions at all. We didn't care. We wanted somebody ideally that was healthy.
Yeah.
That was our biggest concern.
Okay. Yeah. It's such an interesting, you learn a lot about your partner. And
you do, but I think part of it is too, is like, you really don't know, like even when you're having a baby, regardless of whether it's biological or not, you don't know what that child's going to be like when they grow up anyways, or what they might, be exposed to in a good way. You know what I mean? Like my kids are now, 7, 10, and 11. And it is so fun to watch them like experience things for the first time, and just their curiosity around different things and what it is that keeps their attention. Yeah. It's so fun.
So I'm a big believer, and I know Jordan is too, in nurture versus nature. Yeah. And we just know, despite all of the medical records and where the egg donor went to college and all it, like we're going to love our baby the best we can. And that's sort of just our attitude with it. And I know it's just, I think that's the best way to go about it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I will say you have a benefit that we have too. I mean, we are in Los Angeles. Yep. Which is not a microcosm of the U.S. And I think that's important for so many of your listeners out there, like that, the people that maybe aren't same-sex couples raising children, like to be allies and to support because, I have the story of, we went into the kindergarten class our first day, and we're at this wonderful school that focuses on social emotional learning. And, but we had this open house night, and we go in, and on the way in, I said to my husband, I'm like, I wonder if any of the other parents are going to be same-sex couples. And he's like, it doesn't really matter. And I'm like, no, I know it doesn't matter, but I mean, it just, just be cool for a kid to not be the only kid. Yeah. So I am sitting there, and the teacher says, I'd like you to go around the room and introduce yourself, and I've got this baton, and would you state your name and who your child is and what your intention is for them for this school year. And so I just happened to be standing next to her, so she hands it to me, and I said, I'm Mark, I'm one of Eddie's dads, blah, blah, blah. And I hand it to the next person. He's like, hi, I'm Greg. I'm one of Asher's dads. And then he hands it to the next person. She's like, I'm Renat. I'm one of Milo's moms. And I was like, all right, do any of the kids have opposite sex couples here? It was just, but it was,
You're like, are there any straight people here?
Right, exactly.
That's great.
Yeah.
So what are the main things that I'm hearing? And I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad that you're on this, and hopefully the people listening right now, because advocacy work is important for the foster care system. And I say that for, anybody listening who is politically involved, whether with Republican Party or Democrat Party or individual, an independent out there, making sure you're asking those questions, to your representatives and doing your homework on who you're voting for. Because I think it is something, I know for LA specifically, I know that was one of, literally the number one thing I think Karen Bass was running off of. And the mayor out here in LA, they talked a lot about homelessness, and point, 1B was the foster care system and aging out.
Karen Bass is a champion of foster youth. She really is. And she used to actually work in partnership with Michelle Bachmann of Minnesota. I mean, this is a bipartisan issue. It really is. Yeah. I mean, the resolution isn't always bipartisan, but everybody truly cares regardless of party. And I can say that about any candidate out there, and really mean that. Yeah.
That's the stuff that gets me excited, because that's the same with my mental health work, is it's bipartisan. I very much, I grew up in Illinois. I have a lot of my family is conservative, and same with weirdly my following and how I sort of the shows that I was on landed me here. And I'm in this unique position of, well, one, being married to someone who's like a Democratic fundraiser, advisor, guru, and then come from a very conservative Republican family and background. So I'm sort of get like both worlds, and I'm just like, I see your point. How do we work together?
Yeah,
And
Thanksgiving must be awesome for you guys.
that's a great word to describe it. It challenges me, and I think that's what the important thing is. But work like this is fun for me, because then it's like, when it's bipartisan, I can relax a little bit, where I'm like, because you're constantly challenging your beliefs and values, and where you land on certain things, and when do I need to be loud and advocate, and when should I listen and be patient. And it's been a very interesting time for me.
Yeah.
And I've weirdly enjoyed it. Whereas a lot of people, I feel like, are intimidated by like the political landscape right now. I'm just sort of taking it all in and figuring out how I can help both sides. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And on issues like this, I mean, this is a no-brainer. Nobody wants to see a child,
right,
hungry or hurting, nobody wants to see that.
Yeah. So looking ahead, what are some priorities, opportunities that lie ahead for foster care? And is there any glimmer of hope right now that you can share with the direction of foster care and where we're going?
Yeah, honestly, I will say, in this book, I definitely, come at it with a hatchet. I mean, there's no question about it. We had, we had a system, part of our experience was terrible. We also worked with some of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. We had some exceptional social workers. We had one who is in the book that was the furthest thing from exceptional. And it was, and that was a really unfortunate experience, but the rest of it was wonderful. And we, but so in my work with the state, I'm starting to see like they have this really entrepreneurial team inside that is willing to try all of these things. And one of the models that they've adopted here in California, which it wasn't being implemented when we were fostering actively, and I wish it were, honestly, because I think it might have really helped this family that we were working with, is they have this thing called the child and family team model, which is within 30 days after a child enters foster care, a team is built around them. And it consists of their caretakers, the foster parents, the biological parents, of course, the youth themselves, the social workers involved, mental health professionals from the Department of Social Services or Behavioral Health Service Department, any family members or relatives, a teacher, depending on where they are, like coach, whatever it might be, and they come to the room and they say, all right, what is the goal for this child? The goal is reunification. Like, let's work. What is that going to look like when they go home? Is this parent going to have the support they need to be able to care for this child and love this child and advance, the help this kid thrive? Yeah. And what can we all do to play a part in that? And you see much more camaraderie than you'd previously seen, or and I wish we had it, because I think I've now been a part of those moving forward in my work, and it's exceptional.
So I'm curious if when the biological parents come to the table and they're part of this team, I mean, were you guys disclosed to each other, or did you have a layer of privacy, or you openly know who they are?
Oh yeah, no, we had visits. We would go. The parents were given 3 hours of visits 3 times a week, and so it's our responsibility
into your home.
No. Our home was kept private.
Okay.
Our phone numbers, we had like a Google phone number so that it rang. I called it the bat phone.
Yeah.
But it was, so that was a way for them to reach us, or anyone within the social.
Your bat phone looks different these days from when they're what people know of bat phones and side phones.
Definitely.
Yours was used for a much different purpose.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it was definitely, but it was, but anyone, like the social workers had that number. Everyone called it because it would ring on both mine and Jason's phone numbers, on phones. So either one of us could get it. We had, but we would do these visits at parks and other things. And in our case, really, parents didn't take them. Like they saw them very, very minimally. I think it was like, 5 or 6% of their allotted time they actually used.
So this is what I'm interested in is obviously the goal is reunification. You've said that, but also for you in the back of your mind, your goal had to be to build your family. And so how do you combat the two? Yeah. And also, like, how do you sort of remove, cause I'm sure there's like a point where you have to take a step back and be like, okay, I have to like let go of some control. That would be hard for me. And what you went through specifically, I couldn't even imagine how challenging that has to be. And then for it to come back around again is just a double whammy. So how do you sort of navigate this? Like, the goal is unification, but also the goal is to build my family.
I think it's, as you start to, and everyone in your class, like the trainers that we went through a nonprofit here, Children's Bureau in LA, that was exceptional, right? And they're very clear about the goal is reunification. It's always reunification until it's not, right? And your job is to support it. And if they think you're not supporting it, like, they might move the kids, like and they wouldn't be wrong in doing that in many cases, right? And we were supportive, but it was one of those things where it was like, the parents had to go to rehab. They had all these different things that they had to do. And as you started to see progress, you're torn because nobody wants to see anybody fail. Right. Like, and I certainly, and now these children that I love, I don't want them to think of their parents as not being able to do what they needed to do to get them back, or as failures, or those things. Like, I don't want them to have that feeling towards their parents. And so, but on the other side, their success meant that I wouldn't have them. And so there is that, even that I was willing to deal with my own grief to be able to give them back, because obviously I have no choice, but I was going to, I would be able to deal with that. I'm an adult, right? Where it was going to be impossible for me to handle it was this idea that they weren't going to be safe if they went home, which was really the situation that it landed in. I am, to this day, I will say maybe someday they would have been able to keep them safe, but at that time they weren't ready. Yeah. And that's what I was just trying to get across to anyone who would listen.
Do you still follow them?
We don't really have communication with them. We do occasionally hear from the grandmother, who's just an absolutely lovely woman. Yeah. And she keeps us up to date on them.
Got it. Incredible. One thing that I like to do here, like I said, there's some people who might be listening that is confused and or has thoughts and opinions that they already expressed towards the foster care. So I want to debunk some myths and I want to clear some things up. So I'm going to just throw out topics. Okay. And I somewhat want your response and or to elaborate on. And if you need clarification, I can take it in a certain direction. So one thing that you hear is foster care is the last resort. True, false? Where does that sort of land in
me? Well, I think that I would honestly say it depends, right? And that's actually in the book. I share this story, but in our training class, the woman says to us, we had so many questions about foster care that came up in the class, and she would answer every question with, "Well, it depends. Every case is different. Every judge is different. Every social worker is different." And that's really the case. There is that. Ideally, foster care is last resort. I mean, look, to remove a child from a home is traumatic. I couldn't imagine being 6 years old and ripped away from your parents, your dog, your teacher, your classmates, and moved to some stranger's house in a new school district. And within 24 hours, you have to be enrolled in school. There is just so much trauma that is just being forced onto you that if that can be prevented in and of itself, that's huge. Yep.
All foster parents want to adopt.
No, not at all. I mean, that's definitely not true. We certainly did. I don't hide that, but there are a ton of foster parents who just foster for the sake of fostering. They want to help these families get their, feet back together. What we see with teenagers in particular is I was calling our sweet spot. It tends to be women in their mid 50s who are empty nesters. They're often single, either divorced, widowed, whatever it might be. They usually have a background in education or medical, like the medical secretary. And what they are is they're people who've been exposed to kids who are in foster care more often than not. And they know that these are not bad kids. They're kids in a bad situation. And so if you don't have that stigma, it's a whole lot easier to open your home to another child.
I love that. These are not bad kids. They're in a bad situation.
Yeah.
Which leads into this next one. Is foster care is only for children with behavioral problems.
Not at all. No, that's so not true. Yeah.
And it's based off of that statement too, is these are situations that are unimaginable and are tough for both the parents and the kid.
Yeah. I was talking to the people who run communications in one of the agencies, and I was saying, look, you have such a hard job because you have these children who, you have to respect their privacy, which obviously you must respect these children's privacy, but you can't gloat about the ones who are graduating college. Or, in California last year, more kids who coming from the foster care, the percentage of kids coming from foster care and applying to college, more of them applied for FAFSA than than their foster care peers. Like, the state's doing a good job in many respects with different things, right? And promoting these kids to go to these things, but you can't share these stories because of privacy laws. So what you hear about then is the awful case, right? Not all of these situations, not all of these outcomes are terrible, right? A lot of them are very, very good. They're just a kid survived a really traumatic and terrible situation to get there.
Yeah. So it's important. Stories like yours are told, in my opinion. I think that it just helps. Foster parents must be married or have biological children.
No, not at all. No, you can be single.
You just said the sweet spot is single, and
right? Exactly.
Single Midwest 50-year-old lady.
Right. Well, I don't have to be Midwest. They can be anywhere.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Middle-aged. I misquoted.
Yeah.
That. So middle-aged.
That is and single women over 35 is a huge growing demographic.
Yeah.
And then LGBT individuals and families are another. And then of course same-sex couples, some with kids, some without, or doesn't matter.
Incredible. So obviously there's so much work that we still have to do. For those interested, please pick up a copy of Mark's book, Safe. It's in the show notes. I'm going to link it out here. It'll link out on my socials. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I appreciate this. This was great.
Yeah, and good luck with your journey.
Thank you. Before you go, we like to end with some words of wisdom. Could be anything that you were passed down, what you've passed down, anything you've learned. Leave us with some positivity, some words of wisdom for our audience.
Okay. I think, for me, honestly, it really comes down to, with parenting in particular, I mean, it's just not taking anything personally. It's really just getting yourself out of the way and letting the kid experience whatever they're going through and just being there to support them,
I love that. Incredible. I'm taking that and applying it to our journey. That's it for Daddyhood.
The ride of your life is Daddyhood.